Probably 100 years ago, inequality was a bigger problem as it is today. In fact, inequality comes in waves. 50 years ago, though, the most pressing problem was probably growth, overall prosperity for everyone. The last 30 years, though, have seen growth for some people in some places and some types, some countries, but for others, less growth. And so the key issue is, why have some areas grown more than others? Why have some people with different backgrounds had better income growth than others? And that's, in a way, the pressing research question. It's also the pressing political question. Why have some areas done less well than other areas? Why have some people done less well than others? And I think that's the key issue, which has now become the pressing political and perhaps the pressing research issue as well. What kinds of inequality really concern people? Income inequality, wealth inequality, they're the kind of headline things. But it could be inequality between places, between generations, and between regions and countries and gender that is as important to people as income inequality itself. And part of, again, the research agenda is to really understand what it is that drives this concern about inequality. And once we understand that, I think we'll be able to design better policies to address those concerns. Certainly not all inequality is bad. I think we can think of good inequality and bad inequality. What really defines bad inequality? Well, one obvious way of thinking about that is inequality that holds some people's prospects back. It holds some people's opportunities back. It keeps some people at low levels of income. It increases poverty. I think that's they're the kind of bad inequalities, and perhaps you're right that it's about inequalities of opportunity as much as anything. Again, this is a key research question, what inequalities concern people. But it's an interesting question too. Of course, if you want to have a prosperous economy, you're bound to have some inequalities. But you don't want to have a degree of inequality that hinders the progress and growth of some companies, of some types of people. And so what we don't want to happen is to have inequality that holds back certain types of individuals, certain people in certain regions, certain companies from starting up. And that's really the key, to understand what it is about inequality that is bad, what it is that concerns people, and then design the appropriate policies to address that. Not just to say there is inequality and we need to fix that. I think that's now too blunt a question. We have to dig underneath that to understand what's going on. I think it's different in a couple of ways. One is we're kind of taking now for given that we know the descriptives. We know what's happened to broad measures of inequality. We're going to try and go underneath that, the causes, the drivers, the concerns about inequality. That's also why we need an interdisciplinary team. We need, from a philosophical point of view, to understand the ethics of inequality. What is it about inequality that somehow is at odds with genuine philosophical views of justice and ethics? How should we think about inequality as it affects families? That's going to need a sociological input as well. And in fact, we're working closely with sociologists of the family to understand how people's concern about inequality is reflected in their family life and the progress of their families. We have to work with other groups from social sciences, and perhaps the increasing interest and emphasis on spatial inequality and the geography of inequality, why some places thrive and some places are less successful, requires building in people with geographic and backgrounds from other parts of social science. And then perhaps I'll add one more key input that's reflected in this Deaton review, specifically by Angus Deaton himself, and that's inequalities in health. And that's become, again, a very important issue around inequality, not necessarily just about inequality of income, but inequality of health that affects people's ability to enjoy and have good life chances and well-being through their life. And we know inequality in health has grown. Is that to do with access to the health system? Is it to do with the way people's lives have evolved? Is it to do with the work they do? What is it that's driving inequalities in health? And why is that such a key issue in the whole research and the whole agenda on inequality? For that, we need epidemiologists and experts in health. So you can see that what we're trying to do is bring economics together with other disciplines to really understand the causes and the concerns, and hopefully a balance of policies that can address those concerns. Decision to leave the EU. By the way, Britain hasn't left Europe. We all feel very strongly that we're part of Europe. It is true that we're leaving the EU at the end of this year, and I think this is a bad decision overall, but we're doing that, so let's think it through. I think one issue is that in terms of inequality, the people who will suffer as a result of Brexit are probably exactly the ones who have suffered from inequality. That is, in areas and towns that are working less well, with lower incomes, or less thriving regions of the UK. I don't see them benefiting from Brexit. And I think that Brexit itself will probably have detrimental effects for those already suffering or concerns about inequality. I also think it's bad for Europe generally, by the way, because I think the future of policy and the future of prosperity is about coordination of policies, about coordination of economics, and that is something the EU could do and does do. It certainly could do better. It should do very well. And to me, the future, as I said, of a prosperous society and a good policy making comes from coordination across countries. And this seems to be a step backwards in that.